Hello, my name is Gabe Aker, and welcome to my presentation on the battles of Saratoga. Now, before taking a deep dive into the battles and finding out what the impact of what happened was, it is important to give some information on what had just happened during this time. It had been over 2 years into the war as the British scripted up a plan to help expedite the process of defeating the United States. Their goal was to isolate the colonies, specifically New England, which would take advantage of Loyalist support while cutting off main Patriot areas from others. British General John Burgoyne was responsible for the northern takeover. After a successful siege on Fort Ticonderoga on Lake Champlain, he set his eyes on Albany. It was becoming closer and closer to winter, so he was tasked with making the decision of staying put and holding out during the cold, or making a riskier decision and advancing even further. After August 16, 1777, at the conclusion of the Battle of Bennington in southwestern Vermont, many of the Native American troops for the British left back for Quebec, which made Burgoyne's army dwindle down even more. On the American front, it was clear to them what was happening. They knew where Burgoyne and the British wanted to go. They wanted to move more south. Of course, this is only one section of a whole landscape of strategic moves and advancements, but the North posed to be more valuable because that's where a lot of the more notable generals were and more of the notable cities. The United States was not in a fantastic position, and as Saratoga.org put it, it was the very year of independence, which was a time of many military disasters for the fledgling republic. The first year of its existence was almost its last. Now, New York City had been taken over, along with not having enough firepower to stop the siege at Fort Ticonderoga. All in all, the Americans were desperate for some sort of victory, especially in New York, where the British were making their marks in multiple battlefields. Although the Americans were desperate for more victories, they had a rise in militia groups, especially in New York. It was something George Washington encouraged during this time because there were not enough allies for them that were willing to help the American cause. As Burgoyne and his troops began to head southwards, the Patriots were doing their best to slow them down by cutting down trees and destroying bridges. With supplies slowly dwindling, Burgoyne sent some of his German soldiers to a town in Vermont called Bennington. This was an encouraging victory on America's end, as the British lost around 200 troops and captured about 700 of them. Along with that, German General Baum was captured and died soon after. The victory proved that the Americans could defend what they had, which would start the momentum and the narrative during the battles of Saratoga. American General Horatio Gates had just recently been put in charge, and he would provide a crucial role of patience and defense, pretty much the complete opposite of General John Burgoyne for the British. Now, as the British continued moving south, Gates and his troops were preparing for a defense that started on a Loyalist farm that belonged to John Freeman. An astronomically important factor in the battle is the addition of Morgan's riflemen, a small group of sharpshooters sent by George Washington in order to prevent the movement of British troops. The riflemen would take the left flank, which was wooded grounds higher up on the battlefield. It is expected that Burgoyne would try to move more inland as well in order to gain more of a geographical advantage. While there is not much movement for either side on the right flank, the left side for the Americans were definitely doing their job. It is important to note that in 1800s century warfare, it's not expected for an army to ambush the other in the middle of the woods, which is exactly what Morgan's riflemen did. The oddball tactic of taking regiments down from trees seemed to be deemed successful. With their help, they were able to take out most of the British officers, leading their troops leaderless in the hopes of causing chaos. As the rebels began to lose ground in the central part of the battlefield, the damage had already been done to the British. Not only did they take another huge hit in the troops department, around 600 to be exact, but they also had significantly fewer officers. In the brief intermission following the first battle, there were choices to be made by General Burgoyne. He did not want to retreat, but at the same time, he and his soldiers were crucially low on food and supplies. Along with the downsize in troops, General Burgoyne had the belief that his fellow commander, General William Howe, would head north from New York City to pinch the Patriots. The issue with that was that the Minister of War in Great Britain, Lord Germain, approved the battles for Burgoyne taking over Albany, and for Howe's goal of taking over Philadelphia. This meant that Burgoyne was isolated, leaving the rest of the battle in his hands. After less than a month of movement and planning, the second battle was set to take place. This break was not acknowledged by Morgan's riflemen, as their stealth and sharpshooting made their small infantry effective at picking off British troops in the woodlands, even though the main battle was at a pause. As Burgoyne's troops were put on food rations, the Americans were able to gain more food, ammunition, and militiamen during this time. They had almost reached 12,000 troops, and to put that into perspective, Burgoyne started with 8,000 soldiers before his siege on Fort Ticonderoga. All signs pointed to an earlier surrender, but it must have been his own pride and stubbornness that had kept him from doing so. The Battle of Weymouth Heights finally took place on October 7, 1777. Morgan's riflemen had one last pivotal play in the battle, which was to take out British General Simon Fraser, who had recently restored hopes of some of his troops, although being heavily outnumbered. Irish-American rifleman Timothy Murphy, part of Morgan's riflemen, missed his first two shots on the general, but by the third shot, while in the trees, was right on the money. Now, during this battle, he almost killed John Burgoyne as well. He hit him in the hat, and he also hit his horse, but he was not able to kill John Burgoyne. Also by this time, Morgan's riflemen had effectively taken out their Native American guides, leaving the British practically stranded. On October 17th, 10 days after the second battle had started, General Burgoyne had surrendered, losing over 1,000 men in the process of the two battles. He was sent back to Britain, where he would never serve in a war again. General Horatio Gates was rightfully championed as a hero, with there also being talks of him potentially taking over George Washington's position. So you're probably still wondering, so what? The Americans were able to hold off the British from taking over Albany, but still, in the grand scheme of things, it was just a defensive win. What's the significance? Let's first take into consideration the psychological effect. For Great Britain, they saw the Americans could defend what they had, along with greater motivation of wanting to win the war, period. To have an advantage in troops, allies, and ammunition to start out, and then to lose all of that to mostly local militia groups and small infantry groups, does not exactly raise the spirits of the losing side, which in this case were the British. From a warfare standpoint, the Americans continued to show that they would not play by the same rules that the rest of Europe did during the time. Sneak attacks and picking off officers that provided guidance and knowledge to their troops would become a major threat to the British, adding another layer of worry to their already growing snowball effect of headaches. And most important of all, the two battles that took place near Saratoga was enough to persuade Britain's historic enemy, France, to help in the war on the American side. What had once been their weakness was now not a worry in regards to money for the rebels. Along with more funds, they also received aid in terms of land units, naval units, and weapons. Not only that, but 2 years after France joined the war, Spain wanted in on the fund as well, although they did not want to make a formal alliance with the United States, but they came in to help the French cause. If General William Howe decided to head north instead of attempting to capture Philadelphia, we could be looking at a completely different war. The Battle of Saratoga ended up being a showcase of the American resiliency, proving to the whole world that they could defend what was theirs, and that they could defeat their superiors, especially with some help. And at the climax of a Revolutionary War, it was completely possible for them to achieve that goal. Thank you for listening.